So the reason why I'm trying to dress nicer and take care of myself more is because I do have an obligation to help. And that means showing people that you don't fully know the history of the 20th century. Because you don't know me. If you don't know me, then you don't know who Dora is. If you don't know who Dora is, then you don't fully know who Sabotendorf is. There is a line of connection. The founding of Thule is very mysterious, as well as Hitler's initiation into it. How is it that such a homeless, downtrodden man can suddenly be sponsored by such a dark-hidden occult group from the East? It's because this is the history of how it developed. And there hasn't been a good historical account yet. There hasn't been a great book written about it. And I hope to be that person to show the reality of the unholy alliance that was. Because this unholy alliance, it ruined history for what it was. There was so much prospect and so much hope and so much prosperity at the turn of the century. Silent films developing, modernization of technology. There was trolleys, there were cars, there was international trade and travel, there was railroads. And then it continued into the 20s and 30s and got disrupted. And that is a sad reality. Because the outbreaks of World War I and World War II were great tragedies. But humans are resilient, and they innovate against great odds. They rise to the occasion. They uplift themselves through looking back at history, not as an obsession of what happened, but rather as a better way to pick up the pieces to rebuild and to honor and respect what was. Not as an endorsement of it, but as an encapsulation of it. Studying history is about preserving a time capsule, because those ideas and what happened must be seen through the mentalities and the cultures and the customs of the time. You must truly look at history like a historian. Not see it through the eyes of your society in which you write, but truly try to see things through their view. What was going on? What would they have already known about? What would they have already experienced? What were they hoping for and wishing for? And what were their fears and aspirations? That is what a historian truly does. He looks deeply at the primary sources. He looks at the pivotal connections, and he looks past those pseudonyms and those fake names that have been used time and time again in these fascist cells. That is the problem here. Swotendorf, Glauer, is actually part of the Schiff-Kibrit cabal based in the Dutch East Indies that entered the Theosophical Society at the turn of the century. That is the origin of fascism, my friends. Fascism came from the East. It was an invasion upon Germany. Hitler wasn't even German. This was a form of social engineering in order to trick the German people. The German people were tricked by Thule, because that was part of the whole game theory plan the entire time. This was a process of slow cultural appropriation taking the form in intellectual enlightenment. It is a form of brainwashing. The Germanic order was socially engineered because they wanted people to look at their Germanic culture as being inspired by some sort of Asiatic Aryan influence, which may or may not be true, but forcing such a thing artificially as a form of chauvinistic superiority is the rise of fascism and Ariosophy having exploited and manipulated Theosophy, which already had forms of anti-Semitic and anti-Christian origins. So seeing that this is a step-by-step process of looking at how the swastika was culturally appropriated, in what forms and in what capacities, whether it was through theosophical publications, or Kipling's stories about the East. But the archaeological evidence of looking at swastikas isn't valid. Not enough. Because that was an inspiration for the elite to get curious about it. But the process of making it culturally appropriated reveals so much more history before fascism was in full swing. Professors and historians have not lived up to this. Because they haven't revealed the history of what was happening. They don't branch what the social engineering of the Dutch East Indies in the 1910s and 1920s with ethical policy was a prelude to social engineering of fascist regimes, whether in Italy and Germany. Maria Montessori is a pivotal connection between this. She is part of the Theosophical Society. Her education doctrines was applied to the prodigies of Charles J. Ledbetter. Charles W. Ledbetter. Because he was a social engineer, puppet master. So this history is very exciting in a way, and I hope people will evaluate it. Because it will make them see that there is so much more depth. So many more layers. History is truly an onion, and when you cut it open, your eyes are going to steam, and you might shed tears. But that onion is a glass onion, after all. It is fragile, but its worth is invaluable. That's why the glass onion of history is something not to fear, because when you learn about Cribbet being the Cabal, you see how the Armenian genocide happened. See how they were involved in a black market tied to German elites, exploiting and taking artifacts from the Dutch Empire, Ottoman Empire, hoping to build a railroad from Baghdad to Berlin, which didn't reach fruition because of World War I breaking out. But during that time, the Dutch East Indies was sending arms across the sands of the Middle East in order to get to Janissaries to use against Armenian populations. And this is due to a continuous grievance that resulted in collective punishment. A grievance that came from the black market of Armenians being involved in piracy. So knowing that Cribbet was involved in its own enforcement of it, protecting its Dutch East Indies empire. Then you have the outbreak of World War I with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in 1914. With thus opportunities of empire now being put in a state that this is the time to test it out in battle what territories and what holdings they have. The Ottoman Empire loses. The British gain control. Cribbet is at a low point because of this, because they have anti-British settlement already, because Theosophical Society is launching the Free India movement. The British were also guilty of human rights violations against the Dutch in the Boer War at the turn of the century. In 1900, Dutch were being put in concentration camps. So Dora being born in this violent world, including the Japanese-Russian War ending in 1904 when she's born, Bloody Sunday happening in 1905, and the Royal Empire of Russia. Dora was born into this world of uncertainty, but also great wealth and splendor that needed to be protected at all costs. So I hope that this isn't an enlightened talk, because I'm here to show the reality of the Cabal through a non-biased perspective, without hurting people's feelings, because this is about showing the truth. And it is going to be painful, because you're going to mourn those who were the victims, whether they were communists or fascists. Because you're a human being, you should still mourn people. Because these were people, whether it's on either side, they did fall victim to each other. Okay? It's not fair to paint extreme brushes anymore, especially if they're just the minor players who were basically the pawns, while the upper players were the puppet masters. This is the history. of the puppet masters.